November 28, 1944, the Pacific Ocean, 200 miles south of Tokyo Bay, beneath the cold, dark waves, Commander Joseph F. Enright peered through the periscope of the USS Archerfish, submarine number SS-311. What he saw through that lens should have been impossible. A massive Japanese aircraft carrier, the largest warship ever constructed at that time, steaming directly toward his position, the HIJMS Shinano. 72,000 tons of steel, longer than 3 football fields. She had been launched just 17 days earlier. The Japanese believed she was unsinkable. They were wrong. What happened over the next 6 hours would become the greatest submarine kill in naval history. One submarine, one crew of 81 men, and a kill that should have taken an entire fleet. This is the story of the USS Archerfish's impossible mission, the hunt that changed submarine warfare forever. The Archerfish's war record, the USS Archerfish, wasn't supposed to be there that night. She wasn't even supposed to survive the war. Launched in May 1943 from the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard in Kittery, Maine, the Archerfish was a Ballow-class submarine, 312 feet long, armed with 10 torpedo tubes, and a crew that averaged just 22 years old. By November 1944, the Archerfish had already completed 4 war patrols. Her record was unremarkable. She'd sunk a few small merchant vessels, damaged a couple of tankers, nothing that would make the history books. Commander Joseph Enright had taken command just 6 months earlier, in May 1944. He was a skilled officer, but he carried a weight on his shoulders that few knew about. During his previous command on the USS Dace, Enright had been given a golden opportunity, a perfect torpedo solution on a Japanese convoy. He'd missed. All torpedoes ran beneath the targets. The failure haunted him. The Navy had nearly removed him from submarine duty entirely, but they gave him one more chance. The Archerfish was that chance. The mission parameters on November 28, 1944, the Archerfish was on patrol in position Hit Parade, a designated area south of Tokyo Bay where Japanese naval traffic was known to pass. The submarine's mission was simple: sink anything flying the rising sun flag, but intelligence had been scarce lately. The Americans knew the Japanese were moving assets, but they didn't know what, when, or where. At 8:48 p.m. on November 28th, Archerfish's radar operator picked up contacts, multiple ships, moving fast, heading southeast. Enright ordered battle stations. His crew scrambled to their positions. In the cramped control room, every man knew his job. There was no room for error at 400 feet below the surface, but as Enright raised the periscope, what he saw made his blood run cold. A carrier. A massive carrier surrounded by 4 destroyers moving at 18 knots. Enright had never seen a Japanese carrier this large, neither had anyone else in the U.S. Navy, because the HIJMS Shinano had never been photographed. American intelligence didn't even know she existed. The Shinano's secret, the HIJMS Shinano, was born from disaster. Originally, she was supposed to be the 3rd Yamato-class battle ship, sister to the legendary Yamato and Musashi. Construction had begun in May 1940 at the Yokosuka Naval Arsenal, but then came the Battle of Midway in June 1942. Japan lost 4 aircraft carriers in a single day. The Imperial Japanese Navy realized they desperately needed carrier capacity, not more battleships. So the Shinano was redesigned. Mid-construction, they converted her into an aircraft carrier, the largest the world had ever seen. Length, 872 feet displacement, 72,000 tons fully loaded armor, 16-inch armored belt thicker than most battleships' speed, 27 knots maximum aircraft capacity, 47 aircraft with storage for 100 more, but here's what made the Shinano truly unique. She wasn't designed as a standard attack carrier. She was designed as a support carrier, a floating armory and repair facility for other carriers. She could rearm, refuel, and repair aircraft from the entire carrier fleet. If the Shinano had reached her operational base at Kure, she would have extended Japan's carrier operations by months, possibly years. The Japanese High Command knew she was valuable. That's why they kept her existence absolutely secret. No photographs, no intelligence leaks. Even most of the Imperial Navy didn't know about her. The fatal decision on November 28, 1944, Captain Toshio Abe faced an impossible choice. American B-29 bombers were pounding Tokyo and Yokosuka almost daily. The Shinano was still fitting out, still incomplete. Her watertight doors hadn't been tested. Many of her compartments weren't sealed. Her damage control systems weren't fully installed. But staying in Yokosuka meant certain destruction from the air. Captain Abe received orders. Move the Shinano to Kure Naval Base, 340 miles away. There she could complete her fitting, out in relative safety. The problem, the Shinano would have to travel through waters heavily patrolled by American submarines, and she couldn't dive, she couldn't hide, she could only run. Captain Abe wasn't worried. He had 4 destroyer escorts, the Isakoze, Yukikoze, Hamakoze, and another destroyer. He had the Shinano's thick armor, and he had speed. Most importantly, he had absolute confidence. The Shinano was unsinkable. Her designers had said so. Her armor was impenetrable to torpedoes. Even if hit, her watertight compartments would keep her afloat. At 6:00 p.m. on November 28th, the Shinano cast off from Yokosuka. Captain Abe ordered 18 knots, a moderate speed to conserve fuel and reduce mechanical stress on the untested engines. He planned to arrive in Kure in less than 20 hours. He would never make it. First contact when Commander Enright spotted the Shinano through his periscope at 8:48 p.m. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. Carrier, large carrier, bearing 040, range approximately 12,000 yards, speed 18 knots, 4 destroyer escorts in diamond formation. His executive officer, Lieutenant Dave Bunting, moved to the periscope. "Skipper, that's the biggest flat top I've ever seen." Enright's mind raced. A carrier this large would be heavily escorted. 4 destroyers meant they'd be running an aggressive anti-submarine screen. Getting into attack position would be nearly impossible, and Enright couldn't surface to call for help. Radio transmission would give away his position. This was his target, his responsibility, his redemption. All ahead flank, left full rudder, we're getting ahead of her. The Archerfish's diesel engines roared to life. On the surface, the submarine could make 20 knots, just barely faster than the carrier group. For the next 4 hours, the Archerfish would play a deadly game of cat and mouse. Except the submarine was both the cat and the mouse. The chase from 8:48 p.m. to 3:00 a.m. Enright pushed the Archerfish to her limits. The submarine would race ahead on the surface, diving only when the destroyer escorts got too close. Then she'd resurface and sprint again, trying to get ahead of the carrier's projected path. Every man on the Archerfish knew what was at stake. This wasn't just another patrol. This was a once-in-a-war opportunity, but the destroyers were aggressive. Multiple times, Archerfish's radar picked up escorts turning toward them. Each time, Enright had to crash dive, losing precious position. "She's zigging," reported the tracking party at 10:15 p.m. Course changed to 210. The carrier group was making evasive maneuvers, standard anti-submarine protocol. Every 20 minutes, they'd change course by 30 to 40 degrees. This made calculating an intercept course nearly impossible. Enright had to predict where the carrier would be in 30 minutes, get to that position, and hope his guess was correct. At 11:30 p.m., one of the destroyers passed within 800 yards of the Archerfish, so close that Enright could see sailors on the deck through his periscope. "Rig for depth charge," he ordered quietly. The crew froze. Every unnecessary sound was eliminated. Men held their breath. The destroyer's propeller noise grew louder. Louder, then began to fade. She hadn't seen them. The setup by 2:00 a.m. on November 29th, Enright had been pursuing the carrier for 5 hours. His crew was exhausted. The Archerfish was running low on battery charge. This had to end soon, one way or another, At 2:56 a.m., the tracking party reported, "Carrier is on course 210, speed 18 knots, confidence high." Enright made his decision. He would position the Archerfish ahead of the carrier's track, submerge and wait. It was a gamble. If the carrier zigged again, she'd pass out of torpedo range. The entire night would be wasted, but if Enright's calculations were correct, dive, make your depth 60 feet, rig for silent running. The Archerfish slid beneath the waves. The control room went dark except for the red battle lights. 3:00 a.m., 3:05 a.m., 3:10 a.m. "Skipper, I have propeller sounds. Bearing 030, heavy screws, multiple contacts." Enright's hand tightened on the periscope handles. This was it. The attack run at 3:17 a.m. on November 29, 1944. Commander Enright raised the periscope for the final time. The Shinano filled his view. Range 1,400 yards. Angle on the bow 70 degrees port. Speed 18 knots. Perfect. Solution set. Prepare tubes 1 through 6. In the forward torpedo room, 6 Mark 14 torpedoes sat in their tubes. Each one weighed 3,200 pounds. Each carried 643 pounds of Torpex explosive, 50% more powerful than TNT. The torpedoes were set to run at 10 feet depth. Against a carrier, you aimed for the waterline. Maximum flooding, maximum damage. Tubes 1 through 6 ready, sir. Enright took one last look. The Shinano was so close he could see details on her flight deck, her forward elevator, the anti-aircraft guns on her island. He could see sailors walking on the deck. Fire 1, whump. The submarine shuddered as the first torpedo launched. Fire 2, whump. Fire 3, fire 4, fire 5, fire 6. 6 torpedoes left the Archerfish at 8-second intervals. They accelerated to 46 knots, leaving phosphorescent trails in the dark water. Time to impact, 2 minutes, 11 seconds, all ahead full. Take her deep, rig for depth charge. The Archerfish dove. Hard, her bow pointed down at a 15-degree angle. The depth gauge spun past 100 feet, 150 feet, 200 feet, and then, boom, the first explosion shook the Archerfish like a toy. Boom, the second, boom, boom, 4 hits, 4 solid hits, shouted the sonar operator. In the control room, men grabbed anything they could hold as the pressure waves from the explosions hit the submarine. Light bulbs shattered. Cork insulation rained from the overhead, but they were smiling. 4 hits out of 6 torpedoes, against a target moving at 18 knots from a range of 1,400 yards. It was a perfect attack. The aftermath begins aboard the Shinano. Chaos erupted. The first torpedo struck the starboard side, forward of amidships. The 643-pound warhead detonated against the carrier's hull, blowing a hole 15 feet across. The second torpedo hit 40 feet aft of the first, another massive hole. The third and fourth torpedoes struck the starboard side midships, directly below the carrier's aviation fuel storage tanks. Water flooded into the Shinano at a rate of hundreds of tons per minute. Captain Abe rushed to the bridge. Damage reports were streaming in. Forward boiler room flooding engine room. 3 taking water starboard list developing multiple compartments breached. But Captain Abe wasn't worried. Yes, the Shinano had been hit, but she was designed to survive this. She had watertight compartments. She had damage control teams. She had pumps. Maintain course and speed. He ordered, "We continue to cure." It was the worst decision he could have made. The fatal flaw, as the Shinano continued steaming at 18 knots, thousands of tons of seawater poured through the 4 torpedo holes. In a properly completed warship, this wouldn't have been catastrophic. The watertight doors would have sealed, the pumps would have controlled the flooding, the carrier would have limped to port, but the Shinano wasn't completed. Many of her watertight doors hadn't been installed yet. Others had been left open by workers who were still fitting out the ship. The seals weren't tested, the pumps weren't fully operational, and by maintaining speed, Captain Abe was forcing more water into the ship. Every minute at 18 knots pushed thousands more gallons through the torpedo holes. The damage control teams couldn't keep up. By 4:00 a.m., just 40 minutes after the torpedo strikes, the Shinano had a 10-degree starboard list. By 5:00 a.m. 15 degrees, water was now reaching the boiler rooms. The Shinano's power was failing, her lights flickered, her pumps began to fail. Captain Abe finally realized the truth. His ship was dying. At 6:00 a.m., nearly 3 hours after the attack, he gave the order, reduce speed, begin evacuation procedures, but it was too late. The final hours the Shinano's list increased to 20 degrees. Then 25. Walking on the deck became difficult. Equipment began sliding toward the starboard side. The destroyer escorts came alongside, trying to take off crew members, but the Shinano was so massive that getting men off her towering deck was nearly impossible. Ropes were thrown, cargo nets were lowered, men jumped into the freezing Pacific water and swam to the destroyers. At 10:18 a.m. on November 29, 1944, 7 hours after the torpedo attack, the HIJMS Shinano rolled onto her starboard side. Her massive hull hung there for a moment, propellers still slowly turning in the air. Her flight deck, which had never launched a single aircraft, pointed skyward, and then she slid beneath the waves. Captain Toshio Abe went down with his ship. He was last seen standing on the bridge, saluting. Of the 2,515 crew members and workers aboard the Shinano, 1,435 were rescued by the destroyer escorts. 1,080 men died. The largest warship ever sunk by a submarine had taken just 17 hours to die, and only 10 days after her launch. The Archerfish Return's Commander Enright didn't know what he'd sunk that night. The Archerfish remained submerged until dawn, evading the destroyer escorts. When Enright finally surfaced at 6:00 a.m., the Shinano was still afloat, but listing heavily and clearly doomed. Enright radioed his patrol report. Attacked and hit large carrier. Observed heavy damage. Estimate 28,000 tons. He had no idea the carrier was 72,000 tons, the largest in the world. When the Archerfish returned to Guam on December 15, 1944, Enright submitted his patrol report. Navy intelligence was skeptical. A 72,000-ton carrier, that was impossible. Japan didn't have carriers that large. It wasn't until after the war, when Japanese records were captured, that the truth emerged. The USS Archerfish had sunk the HIJMS Shinano, the greatest submarine kill in naval history. Commander Joseph Enright received the Navy Cross. Every member of the Archerfish's crew received commendations. But more importantly, Enright had his redemption. The failure that had haunted him was erased. He'd proven himself not just competent, but exceptional. Legacy: the sinking of the Shinano had profound implications. Tactical impact: it proved that even the most heavily armored warships were vulnerable to submarine attack. Strategic impact: Japan lost the ability to support its carrier operations. The Shinano's sinking shortened the war in the Pacific. Submarine warfare: the attack demonstrated the effectiveness of patient, calculated submarine tactics. Enright's 4-hour pursuit became a case study taught at submarine schools. Japanese morale: the loss of unsinkable Shinano shattered Japanese confidence in their naval technology. The USS Archerfish continued to serve until 1968. She survived the war with a perfect record. No casualties, multiple kills, and the most important single submarine victory in history. Today, a section of the Archerfish's sail is preserved at the Submarine Force Library and Museum in Groton, Connecticut. Commander Joseph Enright went on to serve with distinction for the rest of his career. He retired as a Rear Admiral. The Shinano's wreck was never found. She lies in 14,000 feet of water, somewhere south of Tokyo Bay. The exact location remains classified by the Japanese government. Conclusion: on November 29, 1944, 81 American sailors aboard a submarine changed the course of the Pacific War. They didn't do it with overwhelming force. They didn't do it with technological superiority. They did it with patience, skill, and precision. 1 submarine, 6 torpedoes, 4 hits, the greatest submarine kill in naval history. The USS Archerfish's impossible mission.